Thanks for staying with us. So the Nigerian economy has slipped into second recession in 5 years, culminating months of battering and battling with the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, it is the nation's second recession since 2016 and the worst in almost 4 decades. But what really is recession? And how does it affect you and I? Joining us right now is an economist, Mr. Adewala Ajayi, partner KPMG Tax Energy. Good morning, Mr. Ajayi. Are you there?
I'm here. Good morning.
Good
Hello,
morning.
everyone.
Good to have you on the show. So we need your help this morning to shed some light to Nigerians on the issue at hand, the economy. So we slipped into recession, and we know that means that we've contracted for the past 3 quarters. Now, Nigerians are hearing recession, and we've been through this road before. Could you help us break it down for the average Nigerian to understand what does this mean?
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. When we talk about recession, we're talking about a situation where there is a slowdown or a contraction in economic activities. And, how does this arise? What that means is this. When you have contraction, what that means is there is confidence or loss of confidence in consumer demand. And so people are not buying as they ought to be. And if people are not buying, what that means is that companies are going to start losing money and they're going to start making losses. And if they're making losses, there is only one thing that companies will tend to do, and that would be to lay off workers. And when they lay off workers, what that does, of course, is to increase the level of unemployment. So when you have a situation where people are not buying and there is a high rate of unemployment, then you say a country is a recession. Though economists would say that when you have 2 consecutive quarters of declining growth, you're in a recession. So that really is what a recession is, when you have a slowdown in economic activities.
Right.
So the impact, many people hear recession, and I like the way you broke it down, but essentially I want you to clarify something, inflation and recession. How does it work, and what is the impact of both of them on us? So you've explained recession, but we don't understand how inflation is impacted by the recession. We already know we have high inflation. Break it down to the average Nigerian to understand how this affects us everyday life.
Okay. Currently, the inflation rate in Nigeria is about 14%. And it is interesting that we've been trying to make efforts to reduce it to single digits, and we've not succeeded. The last time we had a single-digit inflation was sometime in 2016, early 2016, when we had about 6%. So with 40% inflation, right, it's very high. And so when you talk about recession and the relationship between inflation, what tends to happen is this. First and foremost is to understand that the recession we have in Nigeria is more of a cost-push recession. In other words, because the prices of things are going up, that is really inflation, right? When prices of things are going up. And like you rightly note, we know in Nigeria, Nigeria economy is only dependent on crude oil, right? So there's no money we're making from crude oil, because there's no money we're making from crude oil in terms of foreign exchange. Okay, what that does is to increase the cost of change in Nigeria. And we also know the actions that government has taken in respect of electricity hike in the electricity price, tariff, and of course we also know the situation about the fuel, right? So the prices of things have gone up. And once the prices of things have gone up, what that means is that people are not able to buy. They don't have the ability, to buy. And they're not spending money. And to the extent they're not spending money, what that means, of course, is that, there will be a contraction in economic activity. So that really is the relationship between inflation and recession.
Okay. So let's just get down to layman. The conversation we hear on the streets, since the word recession, this is the second time in 5 years, a lot of people on the streets are like, for me, this is just a word. We have been suffering since. So recession, when was there not a recession as far as the regular man is concerned? And that they feel that it's quite convenient to blame it on the pandemic, because that's another thing we hear, that it's affecting so many other countries because of the lockdown due to the pandemic. But the Nigerian man is saying, I have been suffering, for long. This is worse than just twice in 5 years. It's all through 5 years.
Right.
Okay, I mean, yes, it's pretty easy for a Nigerian to say that because inflation has consistently been on the increase, double digits, that will be, they've experienced recession because they cannot afford to buy the things they want. But let me put it this way. Even before the pandemic struck, right, we had the issue of decline in oil prices. And for people to understand it better, let me paint a picture for you. The oil industry is just about 10% of our GDP, right? But despite that low contribution to our GDP, it contributes about 50% of the total revenue that government makes. And it contributes about 80% of the foreign exchange earnings in Nigeria. And it also contributes about 30% of bank credit. So if the oil industry is not doing well, there is a positive correlation between that oil industry and economic activities. So there will be a slowdown in economic activity. So before the pandemic started, around January, February, we had a decline in oil prices in 2019. You remember, our oil price fell even as low as about $10 or negative digits in early 2020, right? And so government could not make money. And so because government could not make money, then it triggers a whole lot of things, right? And there's a slowdown. And so really and truly, the pandemic only added to the problem we had. So it's not really surprising to people that we're in recession. It is something that we expected.
Okay.
Given the effect of the decline in oil prices and the fact of the lockdown that we had during the pandemic. And so technically speaking, if you don't have a negative growth, a country will not, for 2 consecutive quarters, you won't say that you are in a recession.
All right.
You may have an increase in inflation, but it really doesn't translate to recession.
All right, Mr.
But you
Ajayi.
need to then be able to look at the growth or decline in economic activities before you can say that the country is experiencing a recession.
Mr. Ajayi, let's talk about solutions, because we know that the Vice President, former Vice President Atiku was suggesting that we need to cut the cost of governance,
Yes.
Increase taxes on luxury goods and then reduce cost of governance by removing the Esther codes and all the other things, benefits that our leaders have. Do you think that can be a solution that we can see? Or are there more important monetary policies that CBN must take to help us bounce back?
Okay, that's very interesting. If you remember the last time we had this conversation on the economic sustainability plan, right? Government talked about some stimulus packages that they needed to do, and so we know about the 2.3 trillion naira that government wants to spend between March of this year or end of March this year to April next year, 12 months period. And the whole idea then is that if that money is spent, right, we'll be able to reduce the impact on the decline on GDP to about 0.59%. That was the plan. So when you look at the cost of recession in Nigeria, apart from the issues in oil, right, we've been talking about diversifying our economy for a very long time. We want to go into agriculture, we want to go into manufacturing, we want to be able to produce what we eat or eat what we produce and all those things, but nothing has really happened, right? We talk the talk, but we don't walk the talk, right? You're right to say that one of the problems we have in Nigeria is the cost of governance. Cost of governance is pretty high, right? When you have a situation where we have a 5 trillion in our budget deficit, and the question is, where do you get money to finance that deficit? You have to borrow. And so, but there are certain things that you can do to reduce the impact of the deficit. You have to reduce the size of government. The size of government, both at the national level and at the state level, currently is extremely high. So we need to reduce that. There is no point in trying to make more money, and we're spending that more money on government officials. So that has to happen. And the second thing, of course, that also has to happen is what you've talked about, tax measures. And the Nigerian tax authorities, either at the federal or state level, have actually taken measures to try and cushion the impact of recession on businesses. And of course, the latest thing that CBN has done to try and manage it is when they reduce the rate of the monetary policy rate from 12.5% to 11.5%. The whole idea is to be able to, get banks to be able to give credit, to customers, right? So that's what CBN is doing, and hopefully that will work. And obviously, what that does, of course, is that also can also in a way, also increase inflation when you have more money in circulation.
Right. Okay,
The reasons why CBN has taken that particular measure is because they believe that this recession is cost push, rather than some structural issues in the.
Okay, we'll come back to that issue. Let's go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. We still have our guest with us, Mr. Ajayi from KPMG. Mariam, you're going to ask a question. Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, so of course we have, as you earlier said, Mariah, a lot of people are giving suggestions on the way forward, and the former vice president gave like a whole list. And there was one that he talked about, the stimulus package, and he says like a 5,000 naira to be paid to, individuals that will be worse hit by this recession. And for me, that also sounds like the trader money kind of arrangement. And I know that was heavily criticized. What is your opinion on that?
It's very interesting. I think the problem we've had in this country has always been a question of mistrust, a question of transparency, right? I mean, you've talked about trader money, or money market. What has happened in Nigeria is the fact that these are basically transfers of cash, to people. But, at the end of the day is that, there is really no accountability as to who receives this money, how this money is spent, right? But, the fact of the matter is that one of the, tested approaches to dealing with recession is for government to spend. You really have to spend money because you're saying that people are not demanding. There's a contraction, so you need to spend. But you spend on infrastructure, right? The kind of projects that will create employment opportunities. Mm-hmm. You spend on agriculture, where it can generate, massive employment opportunities, for people. But of course, you also have the small businesses, which really are the engine of growth for the, for the sector, the informal market. So you also need to encourage that, right? But the question is, who are the people receiving this money? Mm-hmm. Are they giving it to the right people? Are they accounting for the money? So that is really the dilemma that we need to deal with in Nigeria, since the trader money program, started. It's just a way of a social intervention program. But Nigerians just don't have any trust or any faith in, in the program in itself.
Okay.
So really, we need to spend, but there has to be transparency.
Right.
So I have about 4 questions, but follow up on this particular question. I think that we should clarify that because many people have shared opinion that direct cash transfer doesn't exactly solve the problem. Do you believe that just paying money to people's accounts would help them, or should we create a food bank where people get meal packages, like the way we had the palliatives, but in a more efficiently managed manner where those that are really in need get the money, get the food, as opposed to just putting cash into their hands? Do you agree with that?
Okay, well, both. Yes, I do. But what I will also say is that it's a question of, who receives the money. The money that is transferred is not meant for people to use it on consumption.
Exactly.
It's meant to be able to expand their business activities.
They don't do that.
And as they expand their business activities, they're going to be doing well. They create employment opportunities. Exactly. But what we've done here in Nigeria is that there is no proper accountability. And so people are collecting the money, and they see that money as their own dividend of democracy.
Exactly.
So the money is not being spent for the purpose for which it is meant for. Of course, palliative is okay in terms of providing goods and what have you. Yeah. But these are all minor measures, that really won't go, a long way.
Okay, let's...
You need to combine it with other measures. Yeah.
Let's talk about this. How we save for the rainy day, excess crude accounts. We always expect that this sovereign wealth fund that during Obasanjo's time was supposed to save money for times like these. Do you think we have enough buffer to carry the economy for this period?
We don't. That's the obvious one. We don't have any buffer. Well, you remember in 2014 when oil price was as high as $110. What did we do with the money? We blew the money, and that is why we are where we are today. Really, we've never had buffer. We've never planned for the rainy day, unfortunately. Wow. We talk all the time about creating buffer, but we don't. And that is why we can't even finance our budget. There's a 5 trillion that we need to finance in 2021 budget, and we have to borrow. And if you're up to borrow, what that means is that you're not making enough money, You're going to be spending a lot of the money that you make on interest and payment.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we still have to borrow. We still need to spend.
Right.
So that's the dilemma.
Okay, let me get a few more questions in for you before we round up.
Have offer.
Go ahead.
Please, I want to just quickly ask this question. There are two decisions the government made this year that has heavily impacted this inflation recession. One is the impact of increase in oil price of petrol and increase in power. Do you think it was the right decision or something that maybe if we didn't do it, it would have eased the lot of the average Nigerian? Second question is, how can the government drive down the cost of food? Because that is affecting everybody every day. So what do you think they can do? Two different questions.
Okay, thanks. So on the first question, yes, I agree it is the right decision. It's a decision that we should have taken a long time ago, really. People complain that, look, they don't have power. You can't have power when you're not paying cost-reflective tariff. So it's like a head and chicken thing. You will need to be able to spend money to improve the infrastructure, the power infrastructure. So government needs to increase the tariff. That is fine. Then for petrol, we need, because we have said already that we're subsidizing. Right, subsidy doesn't pay anybody. People don't subsidize consumption. We subsidize production. Yeah. And that is what we're doing in Nigeria. We're subsidizing consumption. So the answer to your question, yes, we need to increase the tariff for electricity, and we need to remove the subsidy. So I agree with what government has done. We should have done it, a long time ago. In terms of how do we reduce the cost of food, because people are feeling the pinch. Yes, part of the thing, one of the things that we did, in August, if you remember, in August last year, government decided to close our border. It was supposed to be a short-term measure, just to curb smuggling, right? But it's been on now for more than a year. And what that does, of course, is that we're not even able to produce or export because of the inputs that we need. We can't even export because the border is closed, right? And of course, that has triggered also the cost of food in Nigeria. Of course, the government is trying to ensure that we protect the domestic market. I think it is high time that the government open the border, and then we can deal with the issue of corruption in a different way.
All right.
So one thing that the government can do, really, we need to open the border.
Right. Okay.
So one last one is, what advice would you have for someone sitting at home and thinking, okay, we're in a recession, this is where I found myself. What are the personal decisions you think someone should take during this time to survive this period?
Thank you. I think the very first thing is to understand that, when you find ourselves, we're saying there's a slowdown, right? So what that means is that you need to then ask yourself, what are you spending money on first? Are you spending money on what is very important or what is a priority, right? If you're not spending on things that will yield anything, then you're going to complicate problems, for yourself. So the very first thing I want to say is that people have to look inward and ask themselves, what are their priorities? Are they spending money on the right thing? That is first. Right. That is one. The number two, obviously, it depends on whether the person has lost his or her job, right, or you're still in employment. If you're in employment, then you need to start asking yourself, how do you, enhance your skills so that you become useful? Now, obviously, in this kind of situation in Nigeria, we've realized that technology is key. So do you have the right skills, the right competencies to be able to survive, if companies start, laying off? So people have to find a way, to expand, the skills.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up right now.
Find a way to look for other things, to improve, their ability to make revenue for themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Ajayi, for joining us this morning. I really appreciate your views on this. Thank you. He's a financial expert with KPMG.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I think one of the things I got out from this conversation is our own part of this responsibility. Yes, people always think that the government can make one magic wand and then everything goes away. But the truth is that we also have a part to play. So, for example, from what Mr. Ajayi has said, part of the solution that the government could do is reduce inflation, or reduce the interest rates, for example. That's an example that we've seen. Now, imagine you're paying 100,000 naira for your loan. And now, because the government suddenly, it's an example, reduces interest rates, and now you're having to pay 70,000 naira. Now, that 30,000 naira that you saved, instead of you go and buy food and consume, use it to reinvest. Either you hire somebody else, an additional person, or invest in your business so we can jumpstart the economy. That's the objective Nigerians can do. So the idea is that when they put money into the system for us to have money to spend, it's not for us to go and start buying bags or start consuming. He has said we need to reinvest that money to kickstart our economy so we can begin to have engage people, and that's how we can solve this problem together. So I think that's our responsibility as citizens. You were saying something.
Yes, I just wanted to add, you were saying that the monies that you do make or are able to save now, how we consume them. I don't think it matters what you spend it on, as long as you spend it within the country. So if you spend it on food, if you spend it on bags, you are putting money into that particular industry.
Right.
And so that is jump-starting the economy
Exactly.
anyway. The only thing we're saying is that maybe do not take those monies out. And I think that's why the former vice president was saying that for people who use our forex to buy imported luxury items, they should be heavily taxed so that that money still comes back to us. Yeah.
Makes sense. All right, so let's move on to security.